Okay, ready to dive into some serious geopolitics.
Always.
Today, we're going deep with George Friedman's The Next Decade.
Ah, Friedman.
You probably know him, founded Stratfor,
Yes,
right?
global intelligence, the whole shebang.
But this deep dive, it's not just skimming the surface.
No, gotta get to the good stuff.
We're uncovering the really fascinating bits about what might be coming in the next few years.
The hidden gems, you could say.
Exactly. And one of the most interesting things Friedman argues is this whole concept of the U.S. as an unintended empire.
Right from the start, he lays that out.
So unpack that for us a bit. What does he even mean by that?
Well, Friedman's saying America, it didn't exactly set out to rule the world,
No, not some master plan or anything.
but it's like their economy, their military, it creates this unavoidable situation. They're tangled up globally, whether they like it or not.
So even if we wanted to, step back, isolate ourselves.
Can't really be done. Too big, too interconnected.
And Friedman, he gives some pretty startling numbers to back this up.
Well, yeah, he does. Even with all the recent economic, ups and downs, U.S. economy,
Still massive.
25% of the global economy. Staggering, isn't it?
25%. Any little wobble here.
That's it. It's ripples everywhere.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He gives an example, I remember, about Americans eating shrimp.
And the impact it has on, fish farmers way over in the Mekong Delta.
Yeah. Seems so random, but it shows how connected things really are.
It all comes back to supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
U.S., huge shrimp consumer. That creates demand globally.
So if our demand changes even a little...
Prices shift, and that hits those farmers, folks, depending on those exports.
it makes you think about every choice,
Unintended consequences everywhere.
But Friedman, he doesn't just stop at the economic side. There's the military aspect, too, to this whole unintended empire.
Of course. U.S. military, it's everywhere. Bases, troops. In so many countries, it's hard to even keep track.
It's not just about economic clout. It's projecting power, too, right?
Precisely.
Oh.
And that creates pushback, resistance. Friedman says managing all that, that's going to be key for the U.S. in the years to come.
It's like being this unintended empire. It's not all sunshine and roses.
Comes with responsibilities, challenges. You can't just ignore the world.
Friedman also dives into the 2008 financial crisis. And it's not just a side note. He ties it back to this whole idea of American power.
He does. He's saying that crisis, it wasn't just some random event, isolated,
But it did start with the U.S. housing market, all those risky loans.
It did. But Friedman's point is the U.S. economy is so big, so influential that internal problems.
They become global problems.
Exactly. Like those crises after World War II, the 70s, 80s, those happened and the whole world felt it.
Because we're all so tied to the U.S. financial system.
Intertwined, like a domino effect, you could say.
U.S. is the biggest domino. And when it falls,
Everyone goes down.
he mentions Poland, Hungary hit really hard when the U.S. market crashed.
They were deeply integrated, so yeah, big consequences for them.
So Friedman says, understanding these ripple effects, it's crucial.
For everyone, not just economists. It's how the world works today.
But what I find fascinating, he looks at the past for solutions too, like how Roosevelt, Reagan, they dealt with similar situations.
Especially how they handled the public, keeping everyone calm.
Projecting confidence, like, we got this, even if behind the scenes.
They were scrambling.
It was about managing perceptions, stopping the panic.
Which is just as important as any policy sometimes.
He also talks about how both Roosevelt and Reagan, they knew the free market isn't this pure thing.
It's political. He uses corporations as an example, how they're created by the state.
So even the free market
Is shaped by politics.
a point we tend to forget.
We do. And Friedman says that's crucial to remember, especially during crises. And then there's the long-term stuff, demographics, potential labor shortages.
Things that'll have a huge impact down the line.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got the unintended empire, its economic side. But Friedman also tackles terrorism. That's been a major issue for decades now.
He calls it a trap born out of weakness.
Weakness, not strength.
Groups like Al-Qaeda, they use it to create fear, then try to use that for political games. But Friedman says 9/11, that backfired big time.
Because it forced the Bush administration's hand, led to Afghanistan?
Exactly. That pressure to react, all the public outrage, It played right into their hands.
And Friedman goes into the details there, even about allies like the Northern Alliance and even Iran being involved in that invasion.
Oh yeah, it gets messy. All these alliances, rivalries, the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Like a geopolitical thriller.
It is, and it shows just how complicated dealing with terrorism is, especially in the Middle East.
Friedman also points out the dilemma with countries like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan.
They have their own agendas, haven't always been cooperative in fighting al-Qaeda.
So is he saying getting rid of terrorism completely? It's just not possible.
It's about managing the threat, not eradicating it. He says we have to be smart, not fall into that trap of overreacting.
A nuanced approach, then, balancing security with understanding just how complex it all is.
Exactly. And then he gets really specific about Israel.
That's where things get interesting because it's such a sensitive topic.
Friedman gives this concise history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the power shifts, the land claims.
But he doesn't just rehash history. He makes us think about the U.S. relationship with Israel critically.
And that's where it gets controversial, right? He says we need to view it through the lens of national interest, America's interest.
And he suggests a pretty bold move, disengaging from Israel quietly to help restore balance in the region.
He's not saying abandon them, but recalibrate the relationship. The costs, he argues, they've started to outweigh the benefits. That's a big statement.
He points to how Israel's value as an ally, strategically, it's diminished. And the costs, financial, diplomatic, they've been rising.
So he's suggesting, stepping back a bit, it might actually be good for everyone involved.
Even Israel.
Even Israel, in the long run. It's complicated, of course. Friedman doesn't ignore that. But he wants us to think outside the usual narratives. And then there's his analysis of Iran. Equally thought-provoking.
Right, Iran. That's another one where things get really interesting.
He talks about the historical balance between Iran and Iraq, how the U.S. invasion threw that all out of whack.
And paved the way for Iran to become the dominant power.
Exactly. But then he drops this bomb. He recommends a strategic alliance with Iran.
Whoa, hold on. Alliance with Iran, that's a huge shift.
It is. Almost like Roosevelt allying with the USSR in World War II. Friedman says it serves U.S. interests, contains other powers, maybe even helps with the whole nuclear issue.
But what about our allies? Saudi Arabia, Israel, they wouldn't be happy.
He knows it'd be a challenge politically, but he thinks the potential benefits, especially in terms of stability, they outweigh the risks. It's a gamble, but one he thinks is worth considering.
So Friedman's advocating for a complete rethink of how we view the world. The old alliances, the old rivalries, they might not apply anymore.
It's about adapting to a changing world. And he's definitely challenging us to do that. And it's not just the Middle East that Friedman focuses on.
No, he goes global.
He takes us over to the Western Pacific next. Sees a whole other set of challenges brewing there.
Things get really interesting there with China, Japan, right? Two major players.
Long history of rivalry.
And now they're both kind of vying for influence on that global stage.
Friedman, he goes way back, reminds us about Japan. How important they've been for the U.S. in the Pacific since, well, World War II.
A key ally, right, during the Cold War, and now, with China rising.
Crucial partner for containing that.
But Japan's got this weird thing going on. They're an economic powerhouse, third largest economy in the world.
Yet so vulnerable at the same time.
So what makes them so susceptible, despite all that economic strength?
It's all about geography. Island nation. Dependent on import.
Energy especially, right?
Oh yeah, oil, all that. Those sea lanes, got to stay open.
And who controls those? The U.S. Navy.
Exactly. Japan's security, economically, it's tied to American military power.
Like a two-way street. They depend on us. We depend on them.
Symbiotic, you could say. But anything messes with those sea lanes.
Terrorism, pirates, conflict with someone like China.
Huge impact on Japan. And by extension, the global economy.
It's a pressure point. A potential flashpoint, like Friedman says.
He's not saying China's unstoppable, though.
No.
Friedman's smart. He sees their internal issues, that gap between their coastal cities all booming and the interior.
Still struggling. Two different Chinas, almost.
And that creates problems, resentment. Friedman says if they don't bridge that gap, the Chinese government.
Could lead to unrest, even the country breaking apart.
Fragmentation, yeah. So China's on the rise, sure, but they've got weaknesses too.
So how does the U.S. play this, then, this Asian chess game? How do we keep things stable over there?
Friedman, he lays out a multi-pronged approach. First, whatever we can do to keep China stable internally.
Because of chaotic China.
Benefits nobody. Don't want to poke the bear.
But how do you even influence a country like that? They're not exactly open to outside advice.
Friedman says diplomacy, engagement, Find those areas where we agree, work together, trade, climate change, things like that.
Common ground, even if it's small.
Got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Second part. Japan. Keep those sea lanes open, safe, but also be aware of how nervous they are.
It's a tightrope walk, huh?
It is. Reassure them we're there, but don't make China mad while doing it. And then third, all the other players over there. South Korea, Australia, Singapore.
Build up those relationships, too.
Network of alliances to counterbalance any threats.
So it's not about going it alone. It's about
Cooperation, interdependence.
Yeah.
Making it clear, anyone messes with the balance, they face all of us. Then Friedman shifts gears again. Latin America. Compared to the Middle East, the Pacific seems pretty quiet.
Relatively stable, yeah. Less drama.
Friedman acknowledges that, but there's one country he flags. Brazil.
Brazil, huh? They've been doing well economically last few years.
Big economy, lots of resources, democracy seems stable. But Friedman, he sees them as a potential challenge.
Why is that?
They're exports, they're diverse, they're not reliant on just one thing. So when regional economies wobble, Brazil's less affected.
Insulated in a way.
He even says the U.S. needs to start thinking about counterbalancing them.
So if Brazil's a potential problem, what do we do about it?
Proactive strategy, he says.
Yeah.
Strengthen Argentina.
Argentina, how does that help?
Build them up economically, militarily, make them a counterweight to Brazil's influence.
It's like geopolitics on a grand scale, isn't it? Moving these pieces around.
Chess game, for sure. But then there's Mexico, right on our border, and all the issues they've been having.
Drugs, violence, cartels.
Friedman gets into that, how it's all tied to the U.S., really.
Our demand for drugs, for cheap labor, it fuels those problems.
It's a cycle. And just shutting down the border like some people want?
Not going to work, Friedman says.
No, he's all about being pragmatic. Secure the border, yes, but also contain the violence. Don't let it spill over.
But Mexico has to solve their own problems, ultimately.
We can't do it for them. And then Friedman circles back to the U.S. itself. It's like while we're dealing with all this external stuff.
We have our own internal issues to worry about.
Exactly. The long-term viability of the U.S., that's his real concern.
It's amazing how Friedman brings it all together, right? Economics, terrorism, even technology. It all goes back to that idea of the U.S. as this unintended empire.
It really changes how you see America's role in the world, doesn't it?
And he doesn't sugarcoat it either. He says, even if we wanted to, we can't just, check out, retreat from the world.
Nope. Too entangled, too connected. Friedman warns us about getting caught up in those moral crusades, too. Trying to spread democracy everywhere, forcing our values on others.
Not going to work, he says.
He thinks a truly effective foreign policy, it's got to be based on national interest, not idealism.
That's a little cold, isn't it? Putting pragmatism above everything else.
Sounds Machiavellian, yeah. But I think Friedman's just being realistic. Sometimes you got to make tough choices, even unpopular ones.
He even suggests sometimes you got to ally with your former enemies.
Just like Roosevelt did with Stalin back in World War II. Strange bedfellows sometimes.
It's definitely a different way of thinking about things. But Friedman seems to be saying pragmatism over ideology. That's how you survive in this world.
Adaptability. Another thing that stood out to me, how much Friedman emphasizes sea power.
The oceans, yeah, he keeps coming back to that.
He thinks controlling the seas, that's the foundation of global power, global security, and the U.S. Navy. That's the key to it all, projecting power across the oceans, controlling those trade routes, protecting shipping. That's how America maintains its reach, he says.
And he talks about how space is becoming part of this naval picture, too. It's not just ships anymore.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Satellites, they're already essential. Intelligence, communication, targeting. But Friedman says space-based weapons, those could be next. It's like the battle space is expanding beyond the Earth itself.
That's kind of scary when you think about it. Wars in space.
It is. But Friedman says the U.S., we got to adapt to this new reality. Invest in the tech, the capabilities we'll need to stay ahead.
It's a lot to take in, but it's exciting, too, in a way. Like, this new era is just starting, and we get to see how it unfolds. All these challenges, but also possibilities.
Friedman ends on a hopeful note, I think. He knows there are big problems coming, but he thinks the U.S. has a chance in this next decade to prepare, to get ready, and come out stronger.
He leaves us with this question, though. If the U.S. is an unintended empire, what does that mean for the future? What's our role in shaping it?
It's a question we all have to grapple with, I think. As citizens, as voters, as people living in this interconnected world. Friedman's book, it's definitely worth a read. The Next Decade. It's dense, makes you think, and it might just change your mind about a few things.
We've just scratched the surface here, but hopefully this deep dive gave you a taste of what Friedman's getting at. It's a book that'll stick with you. So keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions. The future's being written right now, and we all have a part to play.